Welcome once again to the Regents Roundtable. My guest today is Don Elliman. Don has been the chancellor of the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus since 2012. He started his career, longtime publishing executive at Time Warner. He was there for 32 years. Don was the publisher of People magazine and the president of Sports Illustrated before retiring there as an executive vice president at Time Inc. Elliman then served as 4 years as CEO of Ascent Sports, that then became Kroenke Sports Enterprises, overseeing all activities of the Denver Nuggets and the Colorado Avalanche. He then worked for 4 years in Colorado state government as executive director of the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, and then as the chief operating officer for the state. Before becoming chancellor at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus, Don was the executive director at the University of Colorado School of Medicine's Gates Center for Regenerative Medicine. That was a mouthful for me, Don. Thanks for being here. Great seeing you. And you've had quite the career, so that was a nice intro to go through.
Well, I think my career proves I can't hold a job, I've been blessed. I mean, I've been able to do things that I love doing, and as I got older, I was able to do some things that I thought gave back a little bit, and that made me feel really pretty fulfilled. So I'll stick with what I said. I think I've been blessed.
Yeah. So you have a unique perspective. Part of the reason I want to talk to you is you're just always fun and interesting to talk to, but you have a very unique perspective when it comes to being a university trustee. You've served and currently serve on several boards for various institutions. You used to be a trustee at Colorado State University, which is a large public land-grant university, and as a trustee at Middlebury College, which is a small liberal arts institution in Vermont that's very highly regarded. And now as a chancellor at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus, you work with an elected Board of Regents. My guess is you could probably lead a master class on this stuff, on how to be a great board member. But in general, what do you think it takes to be a successful board member, just in general?
I think there's certainly some nuance depending on what that board is paneled for. I think the most important thing is to understand that the role of a board member is oversight and not management, and that's not a nuance. That's a fairly simple structure to understand, but it's often abused, I guess I would say, and often with the best of intentions, the best of heart. But the basic principle of a board is that, or of an organization, in any institution, is that management has the responsibility of running it, and the board has the responsibility of oversight. Mm-hmm. I mean, the board's number one job is to hire and fire the CEO of whatever the institution happens to be. And then not exactly and they have to evaluate that. So they certainly have to understand what the major strategies and issues are of the institution, but basically, to the extent possible, stay out of the idea of actually physically running it. So
yeah, why is that temptation so strong, do you think?
Oh, because you've got highly accomplished people on the boards, and they're all used to running other things, and so it's human nature, I think, to think that you can add value by doing that, and generally speaking, the reverse is the case.
Right.
The hardest thing in any job that I've ever had is not understanding where you can add value, but it's understanding where you don't add value and making sure to stay out of the way of the people that are trying to get things done in areas that aren't necessarily within your particular expertise. And right. That's true for board members too.
So where do you think a trustee or a regent or a governor, depending on what the institution calls them, where do you think the best places they can add value? How can they really help?
Well, absolutely, it's in the evaluation of the management of the institution. I mean, that's job one for a board. Beyond that, and that requires a fairly in-depth knowledge of what the institution not only is there to do, but also the strategies and challenges that the institution faces. Um, Beyond that, clearly, certainly as it relates to a trustee of a higher educational institution, it's representing that institution to the public, and
Mhm.
and being in essence an ambassador for that institution to the publics, to the publics that the institution serves. So it's a dual role, but it's both sides are important.
Yeah. I mean, you are the I mean, as a board member, I completely agree. You're an ambassador for the institution.
And
So you
that's
mentioned
especially
like,
true of an elected
yeah,
board. I mean,
yeah.
there's no question about that.
But there's so few of those. It's like, that's Colorado and Nevada and Nebraska and Michigan. So the rest of the world is like, yeah, it's like they're appointed. And I'm guessing where you might want to go with this, but where could trustees not add value? Where could they take away value by their involvement?
Well, I think by dipping into the organization and trying to have kind of a quasi management role within the organization, that's not their job. And it can make it very difficult for the people who are charged with running whatever that aspect of the
Hmm.
institution is to get things done, because um, people the people that the trustees reach out, a trustee might reach out to, are going to think that, oh, there's a higher authority, I don't need to worry about my personal chain of command, I can go around it and above it. And that's not just true for boards and trustees. It's true up and down the organization.
Yeah.
And it's a fine line, because trustees are obligated to understand a lot about what's going on, but understanding what's going on and then personally interceding in it, especially if, as in any board, you're one of however many board members there are, and you take it upon yourself to act as if um, you're 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 going to take the dominant role in this without the full authority or understanding of the board. So the only other thing is that there is a temptation um, uh, by board members to probe individually into an institution, and that can get to be a major time uh, suck for the management team of the institution.
Yeah.
And that needs to be gated. Somewhere there needs to be um, a process that monitors the flow of that, so that it doesn't become overwhelming. But
And it's gotta be,
that's
yeah, it's challenging. And I completely agree with everything you're sharing. Not that it matters, because I'm asking you what your insight is from all this great experience that you've had. I know it's challenging and tempting for some board members that, if they think they're getting a bill of goods from their leadership, to go further down, but that causes all sorts of problem when people go off and act on their own. So I've seen the destruction that can cause. I'm sure I was guilty of that more than once myself, so I'm aware of what that can do. So, but I get like how challenging that is, and following the proper procedures is the best way to go.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's not always that a trustee thinks they're getting a bill of goods. It may be that they're just passionate about a certain area, and they're not satisfied with um, the progress being made in that area, and rather than and so they dip into the structure to try and prod things along, and
yeah.
that's gets to be a problem.
Was your first board for University Middlebury or CS Colorado
Yeah,
State University?
Middlebury, and
What
it's
do you
you go ahead.
So what do you wish you had known before serving on both those boards?
Oh boy, I really had no idea at the time that I served on the Middlebury board for 10 years, and
Okay, that's
it,
a
it was a,
that's a haul. Yeah,
it was wonderful. I enjoyed every
yeah,
minute of it. I didn't necessarily enjoy flying from Denver to Burlington, Vermont, 4 times a year, but other than that, it was great. Um, I really didn't have any understanding of the academic um, rules of the road, I suppose you'd say. I mean, I had vague understanding of it, but in Middlebury's case, the then president was who was doing a great job, occasionally was frustrated by the role that the faculty leadership thought they should have in the institution. And I got inserted into chairing a committee that essentially was the go-between between faculty
Oh
leadership
my.
and the
Wow.
administration. And it was a lesson I'll never forget. And frankly, one that helped me much later on. So
Yeah.
I'm glad I did it, but it was, no, I came from the business sector and had served on two public corporation boards before I joined the Middlebury board. And I naively assumed that the structures were fairly different, and I was wrong.
Yeah,
Very
it's a
wrong.
different animal. Now you went from, and I think a lot of there's a lot of colleges, right? So there's a lot of trustees that are these small schools with larger boards that serves their purpose. What was it like to go to a very large, $1 billion plus institution at Colorado State University?
Well, I had spent at that time, I think 2.5 or 3 years in state government. So I was quite used to uh, kind of the bureaucracy of state government, and the structure at CSU wasn't as bureaucratic by any means, but it had some nuances to it that were different. We had I thought, an excellent board at CSU. I really had a great deal of respect for everybody on it, and I also found the then chancellor, uh, Tony Frank, to be an extraordinary leader. And it was a very harmonious board. So, and I've been on ones that are harmonious, and been on ones that were whatever the diametric opposite of that is. They were that way, and I'd had that experience before I joined CSU. So it was a it was a very rewarding experience.
Mhm.
I would have stayed on the CSU board if they'd let me, but when I became an employee of CU, they thought they thought maybe that
Little
wasn't
conflict of
an
interest
idea.
there.
It is, or it was perceived that way. We actually do a lot with CSU,
Yeah.
and I actually, and Tony Frank and I talked about it. It wasn't his choice or mine, but I think we could have worked it out. But anyway, it wasn't to be.
Yeah.
Um,
But it's just interesting to know that. So not many people have had the chance that you've had to serve on two very different like a very prestigious small liberal arts college, and then a very large, excellent land grant university. And that's just the two different perspectives you have is really interesting of how they're similar and different.
yeah, and one was a board of 7 or 9, I guess it was, at CSU, and the other was a board, as you pointed out, of I think 25 or some number like that. And to your point, they had different roles. I mean, there's no question what the Middlebury board had a philanthropic expectation and also an engagement in the philanthropic activity of the college beyond your own personal treasure, and that was important. At
As well, it should
CSU,
be. Yeah,
yeah,
that's a great
absolutely.
role for that board. Yeah.
I went in with my eyes open.
Mhm.
I wasn't shocked by it.
Wait,
Um,
what check do you want me to write? Excuse
yeah,
me.
well, and also, who do you want me to call?
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, but it was, the CSU board was very different in that way. But because of the different sizes, um, there the management or the oversight role was also quite different. I mean, you were much more involved in the oversight at CSU than you would have been necessarily at Middlebury, because at Middlebury we kind of divided it up among the 25, and you had specific areas of responsibility.
Great.
So,
What do you wish most trustees or regents would know on day one of their service? What do you wish they would know,
that
or what
the
do you wish? Yeah.
that they're there for um, for the benefit of the institution and not the other way around.
Yeah.
It's especially in a publicly elected board, the conflict is, do you represent the constituents who elected you, or do you represent the institution that you've been elected to oversee?
Well, I mean,
And
I think the same conflict could be with we know that around the country, these are getting really political appointments.
oh, you
Are
bet.
you loyal to the governor and the party that appointed you, or are you loyal to the institution and what you think is best for everyone?
That is so true.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember I was having a conversation with the chancellor or president, I forget what title they use in Iowa, and I was reflecting on the fact that we had a publicly elected board. And
Just hold on, everyone that's listening. That's a euphemism if I've ever heard one, but please continue.
anyway, she looked at me and she said, "You think you got it tough?" She said, I forget however many trustees she had, but then she said they were all put in place by the same party, and she said it's tough, and so you're 100% correct.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter necessarily how they got there, but it's still that same conflict. You are in most boards that I've sat on in my life. The minute you go on that board, you forget how you got there.
Yeah.
You're there to represent the institution that
Mm-hmm.
you've been elected to or appointed, either one, to be on that board. You're there for them, not the other way around. And that's
yeah.
that is that's an inherent conflict, or can be, and I wish that it weren't so.
Yeah. I always had a one slightly addition to that thought of serving the institution, make sure, like, do no harm for sure, but also to ensure, and this is part of your oversight comment, ensure that the institutions serve the state to the best of its capability, because a lot of time institutions can get really wrapped up in their own stuff and forget what they're there for. So it's still the oversight role, but it's like, if we're a public institution particularly, or a private one, and be like, are we actually fulfilling on our mission, would be a part of that oversight question. Yeah.
But it's critical, and I think to your point on the public institution, it's absolutely critical, and it can be a bone of not insubstantial contention. But that is part of the oversight. I mean, if you're a trustee at a public university, are you serving the people who help fund you? Now, in Colorado's case, the level of that funding is so de minimis that I could make an argument that it's less critical, but but in truth it's not. Right. I mean, our job is our mission is to provide benefit to the state of Colorado and its citizens, and the day we forget that, that we shouldn't be in our jobs.
Yeah.
And so it is, I think, a very important role of the board to ensure that is true. In a private institution, you're there to serve the students. That's why you're there. And or if it's a big one, to serve the research mission of the institution. But in a public university, whether it's land grant or not, I think that is, and it is easy, let's face it, to drift away from that mantra.
Very, very easy, and unintentionally so.
Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned that a mistake that trustees and regents can make is sort of trying to do more of a management role, which seems, it happens wherever you are, it sounds like. Is there anything else that are common mistakes that you see trustees or regents make that could be avoidable?
Well, I think it's sort of building on the other thing that we talked about, asking buckets of questions about a personal area of interest without particular regard for the time that it's going to take to fulfill that request. I mean, in my own organization and my job, when I call, for argument's sake, grants and contracts and say, I need an update on the research portfolio that we have, the next sentence I have is, and I'll take a back of the envelope version because I don't want you to spend 100 hours giving me the perfect answer. It's people forget that,
Yep.
and it can be very disruptive. So
Yeah.
beyond that, I would say, most of the trustees that I've known, some trustees bring a personal agenda into into the into the role, and it's not I guess the thing I would say to anybody is, this isn't about you.
Yeah.
That's
Wait,
not why
what?
you're
Hold
there.
on, hold on a second. I don't understand.
Well, no, you were never guilty of that, Steve.
Oh, but yeah, yeah, thank you. I wasn't fishing for a compliment.
But you had
Um,
some. No, I know you weren't fishing, but you served on a board where there were some people who very definitely had a personal agenda.
yeah,
Happily, they're no longer on the board, but
yeah,
that was just a
that
fact.
happens. Yeah,
The
it
other
was.
thing I would say, the other mistake they can make is, or could make, is please don't bring a Glock into a board of regents meeting.
So there was a meeting. What Don's referring to is there was a meeting where a gentleman I was sitting next to, who was a member of the Board of Regents, had a handgun in his pocket and it fell out.
It wasn't in his pocket; it was in his boot,
Okay.
and he was sitting next to me when it fell on the floor.
Oh, yeah. So that
Anyway,
was that was exciting. You mentioned this. We touched on this a bit when you first got on Middlebury's board. By definition, we're part-time volunteers, and we don't have that background in higher education. And I had a pretty good, I thought, understanding of higher ed. I'd worked at the university. I served as a student leader. I worked at a company that had higher ed as clients, and I was blown away by how incredibly complex, especially large research university is, but even smaller colleges, all the different issues that boards have to deal with that they might not have had to deal with previously. How do you suggest that trustees kind of stay on top of what's going on in higher ed and just basically try to have some context before they step into meetings?
yeah, get a year's supply of back issues of the Chronicle and read it. No, I'm not, I mean, you're absolutely. I mean, these are very complex
Mhm.
institutions. I mean, my campus is a $2.7 billion enterprise just on my campus, and it's got as many facets as you could possibly imagine, making up that mosaic. And um, hell, I don't even understand a lot of them. But the basic tenets of understanding what shared governance means and what it
Mhm.
doesn't mean, what the major inputs are in the institution, both economically and from an educational point of view. Um, the more homework that anybody can do before they walk in the door, the better they're going to. And I mean, that's true of any job, obviously, but um, I don't think, I think there's a role the institution needs to play um, to more effectively onboard trustees than perhaps we give time to. And I think trustees should demand that.
Yeah, yeah. At the I was a regent at the University of Colorado for 12 years, and I felt I was learning things past my last day. I mean,
Oh
I'm
yeah,
still learning things about higher education. And then your campus is a medical campus, which is a completely different beast entirely, and that took its own set of ongoing educational things. So I had the knowledge to help with oversight. Right. I don't know how to do oversight if I don't
right.
have any context. And so that was just really interesting.
That's true.
What
And
the,
if you
yeah.
take the rest of CU, forgetting the academic medical campus, I mean, you've got three different campuses that are their missions are different,
Hmm.
and they're certainly their sort of educational economic formulas are very different. And I mean, there's an immense amount to learn to be able to opine with any any quality, and
Hmm.
it's a big role.
But yeah, and a trustee at a smaller school would still have like athletics as a thing. I mean, depending how big, which has its own thing. And then, the professional schools have its own thing. A lot of complexity for every institution.
My God, if you look at an institution like the University of Colorado today and talk about, you mentioned the magic word athletics. I
Oh,
mean, with what's going on in college athletics today, if you really wanted to, as a trustee, to have
yeah,
an understanding of that, you'd have to spend a month
yeah.
coming up to speed. I
Well,
mean,
trying to understand. So one of the things I'm going to ask in a second is about big issues facing higher education, and then the medical campuses, and those are their own months long, multi book things to try to. There really is a lot going on. What we talked about this when I was a regent, and I always liked when you said, "I wish you would ask me or ask us what we're worried about." So what questions do you wish trustees or regents would ask university leaders more often?
that that question,
Hmm.
what keeps you up at night? I
Yeah.
mean, we spend a lot of time in regent meetings talking about um, issues that the regents consider to be issues.
Hmm.
Uh, we spend a lot of time on the management side patting ourselves on the back for the great job that we're doing, because we want to present a good face to the regents,
Of course.
but not, or to the trustees. uh, But we rarely does somebody look at you and say, what's keeping you up at night? And that to me, um, is the single most important question you can ask. It's two-sided. What are the opportunities that you really want to pursue, and then what are the threats that you see that are sort of topmost in your mind?
Yeah.
And we tend not to do that.
Yeah.
Maybe other institutions do. Most institutions that I've been associated with don't.
Yeah.
And there's
What
also I think a management tendency to avoid bringing up ugly truths.
Well, you right. We all want to look good. I
Yeah.
mean, it's human nature. Even the most solid professional still wants to report well to their board. That's just what's so.
Yep.
So um, without revealing what's most concerning at your particular campus, what do you think is keeping up chancellors, presidents of medical campuses today?
Declining enrollments. Um,
Hmm.
it is, an issue faced. I'm on the board of the Higher Learning Commission, which
We'll talk about
accredits.
that. Yeah, yeah.
It's uh, and we're seeing shrinkage, and we've lost, the schools that we govern, or that we oversee. Um, how was that for a Freudian mistake? The schools that we oversee, we've lost like 14% of total enrollment over the last 10 years, and that's not a good trend. So if
No.
you tack that on to rising costs, that and declining state support, you're looking at a witch's brew of 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 factors facing institution writ large today. Now,
Hmm.
some see very little of that as a concern, but I think overall, um, the the value equation of a higher education is being questioned by the American public,
Hmm.
and and at some level, I can certainly understand that. If you can go to a coding camp and come out, uh, and earn $130,000 a year day one, having spent whatever it was, 16 weeks to get to that point, um, do you really want to go to a 4-year college and major in philosophy?
Hmm.
Maybe not.
Right.
And so I think redefining the value equation, um, for higher education is something that everybody ought to be concerned with.
Is that the
From
medical side? Is that the medical side as well?
now, professional schools are in a different. We have to be very conscious of that. Don't misunderstand
Mhm.
me. But it's you know, um, and in our case, student debt is something that we definitely need to be
Oh yeah.
concerned about.
Oh yeah.
The average medical graduate today in the United States who gets loans, because some don't. Some,
Yeah.
have their own assets that allow them to fund that education, or they get scholarships.
Hmm.
Um, and but anyway, the average student graduating from an MD program today has something like $200,000 in loans
Yeah.
that they're saddled with day one. Now they more than likely, and if you wonder why fewer go into family medicine and more compete for the few slots in dermatology, that's the answer, or a big
Yeah,
part of
and
the
I
answer.
think from a public point of view, most people don't get that. And it's not. This isn't a criticism of their understanding. It's just like, well, they're doctors; they can pay for it. It's like, well, we also pay for it because of what you just said. We need more family practitioners,
Yep,
but they can't afford to go into family practice
it's
because they're
true.
carrying out this debt. So it has a huge public policy implication. Now, you talked about you serve on the Higher Learning Commission, which is an accrediting agency. Can you explain what an accrediting agency does and what they do?
Your degree at University of Colorado, or any other publicly accredited university, um, in theory, the fact that it's accredited adds substantial value to the veracity or the quality of that degree. And what the Higher Learning Commission does is assure that that quality equation and that the governance of the institution matches standards that are worthy of an accredited degree. The, the economic benefit of it is if you're not accredited, your students are not eligible for federal funding. And so the sort of the carrot and the stick. The carrot is that an accredited degree means more. The stick is that if you're not accredited, your students aren't eligible for Pell Grants and things like that.
Yeah.
So
So it's a
um,
government recommend. It's like the government's approved, although you're not a government agency, the government recognizes that as like the good housekeeping seal of approval,
correct,
although people under a certain age have no idea what that means. So
correct,
basically it's a stamp of like, you're legit, you've passed our whatever
yeah,
methods are.
yeah. And
Sorry.
no, and you're right. Most people don't understand that. It's a it's I will tell you that it's a, I think, overly laborious process to get and maintain that
Mhm.
accreditation. But we're trying to work on that.
What was interesting when I was a regent, I was really surprised your campus was going through the accreditation process. And your provost at the time, Rod Nairn, said, we started 2 years ago.
Yep.
And I was stunned about the amount of time and energy and resources that go into that. What else should trustees and regents know about the accreditation process? Is
Well,
how often is it?
it depends on the institution and on the
Great.
accrediting agency. So
Okay.
the government actually essentially licenses accrediting agencies to be able to have that power.
Okay.
Um, and in our case, we're accredited every 10 years. There's a 4-year check-in in the middle, but it's an every 10-year process. And it took us, yeah, I don't know how many thousand man hours went into uh, fulfilling the requirements of the process, but it was thousands. And in our case, we not only have to go through it as an institution, each of our schools has to go through it within their own accrediting body. So
Is
the
that
medical
is
school
that the
goes through.
same? Is that the same for non-professional schools? So does my philosophy department, does my engineering department at whatever college or university I'm at have to do that? The institution itself gets accredited and my department gets accredited?
Only
Or
in some instances. So you
okay,
mentioned engineering.
yeah,
Yes, there is a subset of engineering schools in the United States that you as an institution would want to belong to. You don't have to. That would acquire accreditate. Business schools, same way.
got it.
Architecture schools, same way. So but philosophy, not so much.
Okay. So I one of my personal agendas that I already mentioned was that passion of how do we make sure that we universities stay on mission. like, right, how do we continue to serve who we're supposed to serve? How do you think trustees, so the four areas I care a lot about, first generation students, students of color, working adults, and making sure our research is serving the community or serving the community in new ways. Is there a way for trustees and regents to help that universities and colleges do that better? Because there's room for improvement everywhere. Or do we, how do we have it as part of the evaluation process for the president or the chancellor?
Yeah, it's definitely
Yeah,
part of the evaluation process
yeah,
for the president.
yeah,
And I think you help by putting the pressure on.
yeah.
The four things that you mentioned are easy to lose focus on. I don't think we do anymore. I mean, I think that we all know. I mean, if you take the state of Colorado, if we can't find a way to better educate our largest minority population, the Hispanic population in Colorado, we're going to be in a train wreck from the point of view of having an educated labor force in the future.
And if I may add one more worry to that,
Yeah,
I don't know how it works for stable democracy
I
if you have,
completely agree with you.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
Up
at
to,
the end of the day, our job
yeah,
is to educate citizens, and in whatever facet of citizenship they want to be a part of. But you, we probably shouldn't go down this rat hole, or rabbit hole. I think it's more of a rat hole than a rabbit hole. But I don't think we have an educated democracy today, and yet we clearly should be bending our shoulders to try to improve the education of our citizenry.
agreed. Finally, last question, Don. And I like to end these podcast interviews with this because what do you like most about working in higher education?
Oh man, I'm surrounded by people who are trying to change the world. I on a health sciences campus like ours. I mean, I I get to sit in presentations and talk to people who are doing things that I can't begin to really understand, except that I can understand the aim or the end game that they're trying to achieve. And it's so bloody exciting. And when I was responsible for the Denver campus, um, I would say that
So the Denver, so our listeners know the Denver campus, there's a separate downtown campus, University of Colorado, Denver, in downtown Denver. That was Don oversaw both at one point, the health sciences campus and that campus. Now he's just at the Anschutz medical campus.
yeah, and
Sorry.
it's much more of a traditional education campus,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
traditional 4 year. I mean, it's got graduate programs,
Mm-hmm.
um, but what I enjoyed the most was graduation and looking
Mm-hmm.
at all of these people and their families, so many of whom were the first in their family to be able to go to college, much less graduate. And the recognition that you are in whatever capacity you are capable of, you're to let helping to provide a road for people to better their lives. And it doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Love that graduation ceremony, and I love what higher education's institutions do, big and small, because we're in the life transformation business through
That is true.
education, through medicine, through medical research, through other research, and we transform lives forever, and it's just an exciting thing to be a part of. Well, this was a great conversation, Mr. Elliman. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time today.
Steve, anytime. You were a great regent and a good friend. So happy to do it. And if your character judgment ever fails you again and you want me back, I'll be happy to come back.
You're too kind. Thanks so much.
Have a great day.